All right, let's talk about something we all feel sometimes, that pressure to sound smart. To sound intelligent and fluent. But what if the way we're trying to do that is actually getting in the way of being understood?
I mean, you've been there, right? You're in a meeting or just talking to someone, and you get this little urge to use a super fancy word or some complicated sentence structure to, sound impressive. But let's dig into why that instinct might be doing the exact opposite of what you want.
So let's kick things off with what I like to call the complex grammar trap. It's this idea, this myth really, that the more complicated your sentences are, the more fluent you must be.
But the reality is, when we force ourselves to use these really heavy, complex structures in everyday speech, it can seriously backfire. Instead of sounding brilliant, we can end up sounding kind of robotic, or way too formal, or just, difficult to follow.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. The real goal here isn't complexity for complexity's sake. It's about being effective. It's about being accurate and clear. So, how do we actually do that? Well, to build clearer, smarter sentences, we first need a solid foundation. We need some good, simple words to work with. So let's start there, with a really powerful but easy-to-use framework.
We're actually going to borrow a little something from the world of psychology. It's called the Big Five personality traits. Now, don't get bogged down by all the details on this image. The big idea is that this is a trusted, straightforward model for talking about people. It gives us a common vocabulary to play with, and that's exactly what we need for this.
Okay, so here they are. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. But here's the most important part. Think of each of these as a spectrum, not a box. You're not just an extrovert or an introvert. You might be a little bit of one, or mostly the other, depending on the day. Having these words just gives us a fantastic starting point. All right, so we've got our vocabulary. Now for the really fun part. Let's open up the toolkit. This is where we learn how to say some really sophisticated things using grammar that's surprisingly simple. So I want you to completely reframe how you think about grammar. Seriously, forget the dusty old rulebook. Instead, I want you to picture a small, tidy toolkit with just a few precision instruments inside. Each one has a very specific job. Now, our first tool, and maybe the most important one, is called hedging. This is all about using cautious language to soften your statements. So instead of making these big, absolute, black and white claims, you make them more nuanced, more realistic, and frankly, more accurate. And I absolutely love this analogy here. The idea of tempering something, like you would in cooking. You're just reducing the heat a little bit. You're making it less extreme so that you get the perfect result. That's exactly what hedging does for our words. It dials back the intensity and makes our ideas more precise. Let's look at this in action. It's so clear when you see it side by side. On the left, you have a really strong statement, like, I am very extroverted. But are you? Really? All the time? Probably not. Now look at the tempered version on the right. I can be a bit extroverted at times. See that? Or how I always becomes, I tend to be. That tiny little shift makes a world of difference. So, hedging is tool number one, and the rest of our kit is just as simple and powerful. We've got comparisons to add some contrast, saying things like, I'm not as. Then there's speculating for making educated guesses with phrases like, it's likely that. And finally, the good old present continuous to describe things that happen over and over, like, he's always doing that. That's it, 4 simple tools. That's the whole kit. All right, now let's put these tools to work. This is where the magic happens. We're going to see how these very simple parts can build an incredibly smart, natural-sounding sentence.
So we're going to build a sentence from the ground up, piece by piece. Just watch how each simple tool we add creates another layer of meaning and precision.
Okay, first we grab our hedging tool. Instead of saying, I am an introvert, which is so absolute, we soften it. It becomes the much more realistic, I tend to be an introvert. Okay, now for tool number 2. Let's add a comparison to give it more detail. We add, but I'm not as introverted as my brother. Boom! The picture just got so much clearer, right? And finally, we use our third tool, the present continuous, to explain why. So the whole thing comes together. I tend to be an introvert, but I'm not as introverted as my brother because he's always working on solo projects. Just look at that. We use 3 simple tools to build a sentence that's sophisticated, nuanced, and perfectly easy to understand. No crazy grammar required. And this right here is why all of this matters. On the left, you've got a vague, kind of confusing statement, but on the right, you have a clear, precise, and accurate idea. It's that small step away from forced complexity and towards simple precision that makes all the difference in the world.
So where does that leave us? What's the big takeaway? It means it's time for a new mindset about what it actually means to be a confident, fluent, and intelligent communicator.
Here's the bottom line. True fluency, true intelligence in how we speak, has nothing to do with using the most complicated grammar you can find. It's about knowing your toolkit and picking the right, simple tool for the job. So, to wrap it all up, first, ditch that complex grammar trap for good. Start with a simple set of words. Then, get really comfortable with your small precision toolkit, hedging, comparing, speculating. Build your smart sentences from these simple parts, and always, always aim for clarity, not complexity. That is the real secret.
So, I'll leave you with this question. Now that you have these tools in your pocket, think about your own life, your work, your hobbies, your family. What's one thing you can now go and describe with just a little more precision, a little more nuance? I bet you'll be surprised at what you come up with.